Is abortion morally wrong? This is the question and debate we see all around us. And those of you who live in United States of America, you'll find this debate everywhere in media. Some people argue that it is in fact wrong. And some argue that it has got nothing to do with morality at all. It is an amoral situation. Today, I'm going to talk about Judith Jarvis Thomson, who unfortunately passed away last year, but she did great deal of work in this issue. She published a paper called In Defense of Abortion, in which she lays out an argument in favor of abortion and what it is. How does she present her view? I'm going to discuss that. So, when we do talk about abortion, we start with the premise that there's a fetus and it's a human being, or at least has the potential to become human being. And it is precisely this premise that Judith Thomson, she questions it. Because it depends a lot on this premise where the whole argument goes. Because if you say the fetus is a human being, then surely the human being has the right to live. And it cannot be a question of mere choice in that case. So Thomson suggests that the first premise of this argument is questionable. She does acknowledge that fetus becomes a person sometime after the birth, but she thinks that fetus is not a person at the time of conception. So just like seed has the potential to become a tree, but seed is not really a tree. So similarly, there's a distinction between fetus and human being. And she lays out her argument in the form of an example. The example of a violinist. So she presents a hypothetical scenario in which she says, you wake up in the morning and find yourself back to back in bed with an unconscious violinist, a famous violinist who has a fatal kidney ailment. You alone have the right blood type to help, and so you've been kidnapped and plugged into the violinist's circulatory system so that your kidneys can be used to extract poisons from his blood as well as your own. And now you're told that if you disconnect him, he will die. But if you allow him to remain plugged into you for 9 months, he will be cured and survive. So take your time to think about this scenario. In this case, if you want, you can certainly save the life of that violinist. But you don't have to. It would be very nice of you if you were to lie there for the next 9 months. But even if you don't make that choice, you're not morally obliged to leave him plugged in. So, although one may argue that the violinist has a right to life, you cannot force the other person to protect that particular life. It has to be the choice of that particular person. So when we analyze this argument, one obvious objection that comes out that violinist is attached to you against your will, but the unborn child growing within you, by contrast, that child was conceived through an act in which you engaged yourself freely. Of course, if it were the case of a rape or a situation where the woman didn't have that freedom, that's a separate issue. But we are assuming here that the woman herself made that choice. And what would you do in that situation? Because child was not forced upon that woman, but it came out of her own choice. And to that argument, Thomson replies that she asks you to imagine this hypothetical scenario again. She says that suppose that there are people seeds and they are drifting about in the air like pollens. And when you open your windows, one might come in, take root in your carpets, and starts growing there. The human starts growing there. But of course, let's say you don't want any children, so you erect mesh screens at every door and window to keep those seeds out. And unfortunately, one of the screens has a tiny hole through which a seed passes to take root and grow in your home. So does this human plant or person plant now have a right to use of your home? Or you can take it out whenever you want. So here she is arguing that it makes no difference that you freely or knowingly took the risk of seed taking root in your house or getting pregnant. Because she says there could be a number of reasons. For example, you were taking precaution, that didn't work out. You were using a condom, that was defective. In all these scenarios, you can't really figure out that it was 100% absolutely out of woman's choice. There's always a small risk involved in such scenarios, and what are you going to do about that? So if you follow this argument, it makes sense, but once again, you may come to that same point again where a lot of religious people, they come and struggle with this idea because they believe there is a soul inside human body and that is something sacred, and killing that would be a sin. And somebody like Thomson would argue that there is no such soul until the child is really born. So then we go to another interesting question, that at what point exactly does this fetus become a human being? And Thomson would argue that the fetus becomes human being after taking birth. But then there's a challenge in that argument, because a lot of times due to accidents, due to several reasons, premature deliveries, they do occur. So when do we say exactly that fetus has become a child or a human being? And to be honest, we don't have that answer. And it's likely that we'll never find that answer, because there are different processes that emerge slowly in a human being or a fetus. At some point, the brain activity starts. At some point, the pulse or heartbeat starts. At some point, different organs start to grow. It's very difficult to pinpoint one particular instance when you can say that life has started. And so far, depending on the argument, which side of the argument you stand on, you would argue that it either starts on the conception or after the birth, or some people might argue somewhere in between. So that is where we are at the moment. And that is why this whole debate is so difficult. But we can only hope that through these philosophical inquiries and discussions, we can get to a better place where we have more clarity and more answers, so that we can come to a closure.